Yeah, so I'm Celeste, and my pronouns are she, her. And I first found TMC about several months after I came out and started to know some Christian trans people on social media, and one of them mentioned TMC. And so I met the Discord, and then I got to go to like a social get together with Mike and Melody and a few others, and that was great because it was just like getting to meet people who were like me. And then I went to another conference and got to hang out with more and just kind of connect, and it's just been a wonderful place to meet other people that shared a lot of my experience, which is really hard to find in the world for someone like me. I grew up in a Christian family, and from a very early age, I knew I wished I was a girl. I should have been a girl. Something went wrong, and that was just not how it came out, but it's how it should have came out. And now I was just stuck, but I had no language for it in the circles that I was in. Gender roles were a thing. Boys were supposed to be boys. Girls were supposed to be girls. And so the few times that I tried to express myself in more of a feminine way or whatever, I got just, it was made very clear to me that I should never, ever, ever do that. And so I had to go away for a long time. I had to hide and build this facade of a guy who everybody wanted, I guess, and expected me to be, and play that role day in, day out. And it was hard, even at church. And I was in a pretty liberal church, but nobody said anything about trans people. I didn't even know that trans people really existed until at least college. And even then I really didn't know what was going on. I think I heard the idea that there were men who turned into women, and I was always like, well, that's interesting, but everybody always laughs when they hear about it. And so I guess I probably shouldn't explore that too much. And especially in Christian circles, I was just like, I apparently need to cut that part off from me. I can't ever let anybody see that. It was the one thing I never really confessed to anyone, even under purity culture. I was just like, no, nobody ever is going to get to know that part because it's just too shameful. As a grown-up, I went to Mars Hill Church, and another church that just was really toxic in its gender roles and expecting people to be something. I had to be the leader in my family and in a church and whatever, and it was just exhausting. And I always felt like I was failing. I always felt like it was an ill fit. I always felt like God couldn't be happy with me because he saw what I did when nobody else was around, and the clothes I would try on and the things I would think about myself that I never even really gave myself space to explore. And eventually I got out of those conservative spaces and discovered that there existed Christian trans people. And the first time I ever saw one, the very first thought I had was, why do you get to live the life that I want to be living and I don't? The second thought was, I'm pretty sure that thinking that means something and I should probably explore that. And so it took me a while, but it was just in the last few years that I finally actually had space. And as soon as I had space, I knew, okay, I need to figure this out and figure out who I am. It's a really hard question. Certainly until the last few years, definitely not. It was, no. Shame? Yes. Celebrated? Definitely not. In the last couple of years, I found church spaces that I felt accepted in. I felt like people wanted me there, but didn't necessarily want all of me. And they wanted me there as a symbol, as a sign that they were doing something right in their open and affirming journey, but not necessarily that they actually wanted my perspective as a trans person, as a lesbian, or other things. And occasionally I would get to talk, and so that's been something I've had to talk with them about and figure out how to move forward and kind of let them know, hey, this just letting me in the door is the start, not the end. Where I have felt celebrated was at conference settings for people like me, and going places where I'm expected and wanted, and that the space is built for me. And it's just, that was so freeing. I went to one in January, and it was just, I guess the most I can say for it is I got back in my car at the end of the trip, and I just called my wife and absolutely sobbed for an hour, because this just absolutely magical place where everybody gets it, everybody is accepting of me, nobody is a threat, and many people have my experience, and even the people who don't have my experience want to hear my experience. And we all understand that we're better off for all of our different experiences, and getting to hear other people's stories and getting to share mine, it was just so beautiful. And it was sad to have to realize that space is so sacred and so rare. And so I desperately want to see that in more spaces. I'm just not there yet. It's made God bigger, but also smaller. And by bigger, I mean just so much more expansive. I think I lived most of my life with God in this very specific box, and God has to do this because God is just, and so if God is going to be just, then he has to act this way, and always he, about all three members of the Trinity. And it was always just such a rigid conceptualization of God. And coming out as trans made me see not just myself, but the world, but God in completely different ways and much more expansive ways. And to see God, and once you see it, you look at the world and you see the incredible diversity that God has made in the world. You see all the different landscapes and creatures, and you look at the planets and whatever, and everything is just so different. And it's really, we think that this God likes people in these two very rigid boxes? It just doesn't make sense to me anymore. That I see God as just infinitely creative and enjoying that creation. I don't think I ever saw God as enjoying us before. And then when I came out, I saw how God could be so intimate toward me and so loving toward me, not just in a I don't know, cliche way, but in a desperately just wanting to be with me and wanting what's best for me. I think I've come to identify so much more with the woman at the well, and just seeing Jesus just come up and just be with her for a bit, and just be there and be compassionate and be loving and be friendly. It's changed a lot of that. I always say also just how much God knows me. I fully believe that God has always called me Celeste, and he was just waiting for me to figure it out. And that's a beautiful thought. It's just, it's kept me from feeling broken which I think for most of my life I did. And then I got to feel like, no, this is how God made me. Even the scars that I have now. I have my hair done well, so we can't see my surgical scars from my transition. But like, I think a lot about like all of the processes of creation that God has chosen to use. You look at the Grand Canyon, and it's like any definition of scar has to include the Grand Canyon. It's literally a scar, but it's magnificent. It's beautiful. And I see that as like, yeah, creation, change, making something into something new. You know, when after the resurrection, the first thing, one of the first things that happens is Jesus showing off his scars, right? And saying, you can tell that something happened here because you can see these scars. And so I've just become so much more drawn to how God embraces change and embraces creation and embraces making something into something else, even if it's something incredibly unexpected. And I think that it's given me just a new love for my faith that I don't think my faith would have survived without that. I think it was too rigid and it was too constraining, and it just couldn't continue the way it was. I think the biggest thing that TMC has been a part of my journey for, I haven't been as involved as a lot of other people, but honestly, even just knowing that it's there, being on the Discord and seeing that there are so many other people like me, it's so easy to feel like in my day-to-day, I walk through life and maybe I'll see one other trans person if I go to a crowded mall and happen to pick them out. But most days I feel pretty alone, except for in online spaces and in those in uncontrolled online spaces. I may have friends there, but I definitely have people who don't like me very much. And so knowing that there is a place where it's like, no, there's lots of people like me, lots of people traveling the same journey and wrestling with the same questions, and is really just makes me feel less alone. The first one is the trans community just as a whole has been so under-resourced generally. We've been shut out of so many things, and so I think anytime you see a great space created that can serve the trans community in a beautiful way, and in a way that really does help people and change lives and provide people the support that they need, whether that's in figuring out who they are or figuring out how to hold on to their faith or figuring out how to transition or how to come out to people. Having that resource for people, it changes lives. I have no doubt that it saves lives to have that available. And so I think just helping make that as full of a community as it can be, I think is so important. But the other one I want to say is for allies, the church has lost so much for centuries by shutting out queer people of all kinds. I see the today's church as the best word I have for it is impoverished. I see it as having literally, if we take Paul's metaphor of the body of Christ, and we have many parts, right? It is the church has literally amputated itself from a key part of it, from a whole group within it that shows us something about our faith and about life and love that is unique and precious and valuable. And I think if people want to see the church thrive and be more full of life and love, then it needs to invest in correcting that, in building up the queer community and building up the trans community and allowing trans people to grow in their faith, allowing trans people to speak into churches. And I think that TMC is a big part of helping trans people come into being able to do that. And so to some extent, I see it as, even if allies want to be a little bit selfish and say, what do I get out of this, right? It's filling that gap and treating that wound that, self-inflicted by the church, but beginning that healing in order to allow trans people to be fully part of the life of any given church, and be blessed in so many ways by having that. So.